Hello, everyone. Uh, this is Jeff, and I normally make videos for the vinyl community, also known as the VC. But this video here has nothing to do with records or music. It's going to be all about comic books. So, uh, if you watch my videos about records, most of the time I talk about them under the heading Spin Zone, which was just my cutesy way of. There goes my dog again. There goes Jinx, my co-star. Um, that was my cutesy way, play on words, I guess you could say, from when Bill O'Reilly had his no spin zone. But of course, he ended up losing his job and his show, so it kind of left me hanging. But it seems to have taken root. What I'm doing with this comic book uh, themed series is I'm going to call it the Flip Zone, because you're flipping pages instead of spinning records. Get it? Cutesy too, I know, but what are you going to do? I wanted to find some way to differentiate this from my usual fare with records and music. So this is pretty much my random thoughts on comics and things that I'm just interested in rereading because for those of you who are new and are just tuning in, I started reading when I was 3 years old with the Charlie Brown Dictionaries, which was a series of hardcover books that came out at the grocery store. And that was the first thing I learned to read on. And Charlie Brown, or the Peanuts Gang, is a comic strip. And it wasn't too long after that that I started picking up comic books and reading them. Probably when I was about 6 years old, it goes back to like my earliest memories of reading comic books, which would put me around the year 1975, 76. So, I started reading comics then. I officially started collecting comics in terms of a pull list from a comic shop in 1983. And I just quit reading new comics in last year. In January of 2018, actually, was when I stopped getting new comic books. So, yeah, so I've been reading them, collecting them for a very long time. And I have a collection which I can no longer fit in my house. I had to get a storage unit for it. 28 boxes, I think, of comics. And I've got like 73, almost 7,400 single issues. Not counting hardcovers and collections, which take up, let's turn the camera here, take up that bookshelf, among others, throughout the house. Mostly downstairs. So, yeah, I've been a comic guy for a very, very, very long time. And what I've been doing is I've been pulling things out of my collection that I haven't read in years, things that I had fond memories of, and wanted to see how they held up over the years. And just rereading some classic issues of series. And this group that I'm going to show you, I think all of these have a story attached to them, which I thought might make it a little more interesting to be for a video. So we're going to get right into it. These are going to be all about X-Men comics and the earliest issues I have of the X-Men. I think my earliest issue is number 13, but I didn't pull that one. But this one here, which is number 57 and number 58, June and July cover dated of 1969, respectively. So once again, I'm showing 50-year-old comic books. I got these off of my, I got it when 7th grade. My friend Chris had a stack of old Marvel. He had some old Avengers also, which I tried to get from him, and he wouldn't part with them. But I was able to get these, and I traded him some random Swamp Thing comics, I remember, which for some reason he really wanted. I don't think they were Alan Moore Swamp Things. I think they were earlier than that, but I didn't really care about those, but I cared about these. And he tried really hard to trade all my Swamp Things for just one of these, and I wouldn't, because these were the two X-Men that he had. So I said it's both of them or nothing, and he caved, luckily. So these are written by Roy Thomas, drawn by Neal Adams. They're not in particularly great shape. I mean, I'll take this one out of the bag to show you closer. Another reason why I'm pulling stuff out of my collection is to replace the bag and board. I can't replace everything across the board, but as I go reading past things, I'm replacing the bag and the board. So here's the comic itself. Decent condition. I mean, it's in one piece. It's got, this one's a little bit worse than 58. I mean, the cover is kind of wrinkled, but some of the page layouts in here, like this famous one here from Neal Adams, you just got to love that cinematic style that he had with his artwork. And yeah, this was a Sentinel story. And the Sentinels were always big time villains of the X-Men. So, wasn't a great selling comic at the time, even though the run that Roy Thomas and Neal Adams did, which lasted like I think 10 or 12 issues, was stellar. It wasn't enough to get sales up, and it eventually got canceled. Well, I shouldn't say it got canceled. It got turned into a reprint title. And it wasn't, the X-Men were pretty much just guest stars in other comics for like 4 or 5 years. And then, of course, Giant Size X-Men I don't have. I doubt I'll ever have an original of that. Or of X-Men 94, which was the first issue of like the rebooted X-Men with the new team. But what I did happen to land my hands on is a copy of number 99, which I also got from my buddy Bob, who didn't really know a whole lot about comics, but in the 80s the X-Men were really hot, and a lot of these older titles went for, back then, big bucks. I mean, they still go for big bucks now, but back then I didn't have any money. So for me to get my hands on one of these things, on anyone, was a big deal to me. So I was able to trade for this one too, but I can't remember. Life of me, I can't remember what I traded it for. But this is the reason why I just have these random issues of the X-Men, because they were tough to come by and they were expensive. And this was also, he also had the Sentinels in here. It's another common theme. And this one, at the end of this issue, led up to the big fight between the original X-Men and the new team. So, cool stuff. Now, when I originally started collecting the X-Men, they were that was like 1983, right around like 167, 168 issue numbers. And the Chris Claremont, John Byrne issues, which were much earlier, were also very rare, very expensive, very tough to get. The one that I did get on my own, luckily, at the time it came out, was this one. And it was part of a 3-pack of comics. If people of a certain age might remember comics being sold in drugstores 3 to a pack in a sealed plastic bag. You could see, obviously the top copy to see what you were getting. And you can kind of figure out what the bottom copy was, but you never could really see what was in the middle. Well, this one came out of the middle on one of those 3-packs. And this is part of the Dark Phoenix saga. This one here, number 133. This one came out in 1980. And, of course, by then, Wolverine was the hot character. He was the one everyone wanted to see, including me. So to get a comic like this with him on the cover and him starring in most of the action was a big deal to me. So I was very happy to get this one, and I've never let it go because it's just one of those few rare comics that I actually had before I started officially collecting, meaning bagging and boarding and boxing the comics, that I always kept because I always liked Wolverine. I still do. And many, many years later, this was probably about 10 years ago, I'm trying to figure out my timeline here. I eventually traded again for this one here, X-Men 137, which was the Death of Phoenix issue. And I traded for this from actually Tom Brevoort, who was the Marvel. He wasn't the editor-in-chief, I don't think, but he was an editor. And he was trying to do a trading experiment to see if he could land a copy of Fantastic Four #1. So he would trade back and forth with people trying to generate more comics or older comics that would be worth it to somebody to trade for a Fantastic Four #1. So I contacted him because he had this copy here. So I contacted him with, I had like 3 or 4 Marvel's Collector's Item Classics comics, which were these big, thick reprint comics. So I offered him to trade those for this because just to see if he would trade with me, and of course because I really wanted this comic too, to have an original issue. And he did. But, and this was actually more disappointing than anything, being a person who worked for a comic book company, and I'm sure he was a comic book collector and reader as well. He basically just took this book and threw it in a manila envelope and mailed it with no protection, no nothing, not even a bag around it, which was really kind of depressing and disappointing because I was hoping for a better condition comic. I mean, this is okay. This is the big page right here where Phoenix dies, where she fires that gun at herself. But the printing in this comic is very muddy and very dark and very... it doesn't really showcase the artwork as well, which is a shame because things were still printed on newsprint back then. As you can see, I mean, it takes the art decently, but that was an argument that I used to have with a lot of people back in the day when I would be on message boards. You know, a lot of the older collectors would say, "Oh, comics were so better when they were printed on this, on newsprint. Oh, comics would be so much cheaper if they were just printed on newsprint now." People are stupid, I know. They would not be cheaper because the biggest cost in producing a comic is labor, not paper. So even if you went back to this shitty newsprint stuff, it would not knock the price down because you still have to pay someone to write it and draw it and ink it and color it and letter it. You can't compare labor costs from back then to now. I had that argument endlessly with people, and being a keyboard jockey is easy because you can just type whatever you want with no consequence. And of course, actually thinking about an argument and going, "Oh, you might be right," is alien to a lot of people out there. So, but I'm getting off track. Anyway, this was another big get for me in terms of the X-Men. Um, Death of Phoenix, the ultimate part of the Dark Phoenix saga. So I was very happy to get that one. And I'm probably going to reread this again, even though I've read the Dark Phoenix saga multiple times. Probably read it multiple more in my lifetime. But one of the biggest deals that I'd got in comic books, still continuing on the X-Men theme, is I got X-Men 141 and 142. And I bought these at my local comic shop, which actually closed late last year, in December of last year. They closed up for good, which makes me sad. But I just pulled this out here. They had, I was just going through their boxes one night, actually, and I came across both these comics, this one here, and the price is still lightly written in pencil. I don't know if it's going to show up. You're going to be able to see that right there. It's going to focus in. It's $2.75, in case it didn't show. So I paid $2.75 for this comic in like 1984 or 5, I think. So when I saw this, this is the end of the Claremont Byrne run right here. I didn't care. I didn't think of anything. I just grabbed it. And this one here, I'll take out the bag. Have not replaced this bag yet. This one here, the following issue, 142, that also has the price lightly written in pencil. 90 cents. So I just paid 90 cents for this. I bought these both at the same time. So both of these were the beginning of the Days of Future Past storyline, which would run through the X-Men multiple times in multiple ways in the years to come after these came out. But these were the two that started them all. And if you don't know the storyline of Days of Future Past, the movies were made out of it. The X-Men, one of the X-Men movies was called that, Days of Future Past. Probably at the time it was very imaginative, and it was very kind of, trippy and mind-blowing and trying to figure out, how did this happen here, if that happens there. But Marvel being Marvel, they kind of strip-mined this concept, if you ask me, a little too much. But when you go back to the original core concept and the original stories, they're still really good. They still hold your attention. They're still full of action. And of course, great artwork by John Byrne. So this is where he really made his name for himself on the X-Men. Claremont too. But I enjoy these comics a lot. And these were, like I said, even back then, these were going for much more, and I don't know why these were priced so cheaply. It wasn't really a comic book shop per se that I went to. It was more like a used paperback store that also dealt in comics, and I don't think they necessarily knew what they had all the time because these would have been probably put, behind the counter. And hold on, let me ignore that phone call. All right. These would have been put behind the counter and not in just the common boxes of their stock. So it was one of those few times that I was aware enough to know a good deal when I saw it and took it. So there's that. So that's basically kind of the gist of this series. Just me showing old comics and talking a little bit about them, where they came from, how I got them, stuff like that. So if this is of any interest to anyone, please let me know in a comment down below. I don't know if this is going to make it over to the comic book community. If there is one, I'm sure there is. But for those VCers who've crossed over to this side, welcome. And This will probably be an infrequent series because there's a lot that I want to reread and show, but time being what it is, it's going to have to go in between all the record videos. So, and this is like my fourth video this week, so I'm going to cool it now for a little while. But yeah, hopefully this was mildly interesting. And if you want to see more, let me know. I have a few more things to show that I brought home, but we're just dipping our toe in the water here with the X-Men, because everybody's heard of the X-Men, or almost everybody. So, till next time, everybody take care. Peace, and I'll talk to you all soon.